Further ado, as they say, I'd like to introduce you to the young woman down there, Adrienne Lieberman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion entitled Out with the Old and In with the New Year. I hope that you leave our presentation tonight with some inspiration and ideas on how to downsize and reorganize your space in order to start your new year off right. So, I think it's safe to say that most of us here are guilty of letting our office, basement, bedroom, or storage area get a little cluttered. I think it's also safe to say that sometimes those spaces get so overwhelming that we make every excuse not to clean them. But what happens when that clutter starts to affect your life and becomes a hoard? The story of the Collier brothers exemplifies how hoarding can get so out of control that it can take over your life. Literally. Homer and Langley Collier were brothers living in Harlem during the mid-20th century. Eccentric and reclusive, the brothers spent decades filling their three-story brownstone with assorted odds and ends. It wasn't until an anonymous tip brought the police to their home that the full extent of their hoarding addiction was uncovered. Police arrived at their house to discover a hoard so massive they couldn't even go through the front door. Authorities and city workers spent days digging through newspaper tunnels, instruments, furniture, and other debris before uncovering the fate of the brothers. After days of searching, the lifeless bodies of both brothers were found in a home surrounded by 140 tons of their collected items. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Homer and Langley had fallen victim to their own hoard trapped in a prison. So, while the story of the Collier brothers is a bit of an extreme example, it does serve as a powerful cautionary tale against the dangers of hoarding. So, our expert panel is here today to give you a professional tips on how to manage your clutter and make sure that this never happens to you. So, we have Ellen Tozzi, a member of the National Association of Professional Organizers and the founder of Natural Order, where she helps clients transform their energy-draining spaces into a harmonious environment. We also have Frank Maraschiello, who is a client services representative and a member of Rago's 20th Century Decorative Arts and Design Department. He has extensive experience in the cleaning and clearing of estates of personal collections. Chris Wise heads Rago's Great Estates Auction. Like Frank, Chris has a great deal of experience in evaluating personal property for people. He is also well-versed in recognizing what items should be scrapped and which ones should be sold. So I'm going to start the panel off with the first question. I'll start with Ellen, and then we can hear all the different answers from the rest of our panel as we go through. So my first question, Ellen, is basically what happens between the kids, the job, marriage, divorce, or death in the family. It leads you to want to get rid of your accumulated stuff from these life events. What advice would you give for people who want to tackle this on their own first?
I'm going to test the mic first. Is this good? Okay, great. I think the first step is to... Yeah, I'd love to stand up. Hey, everybody. The first step is to have clear goals. What exactly is it that you want to do? A very common goal I hear is I want to downsize. I'm probably going to move to like a 2-bedroom unit with not much storage, and I want to move probably in 2 years. So that's your goal. I encourage people to think of the downsizing, the letting go process as a treasure hunt. So you've been collecting all these years, you've now got a plethora of items, and now you're going to just look for the treasures. Make it a hunt, make it fun. Instead of feeling like, oh, I have to let go, make it fun, make it a treasure hunt. So when you're trying to let go, you really want to think about not only how much space do you want to allow these items to reside in, but do you love the item? Or do you use it? So that's your basic criteria. Do you love it? Do you use it? And then I encourage you to make appointments with yourself. Literally write in your calendar, this is the time I'm going to be decluttering and going through my items. It's easy to say, oh yeah, it's the new year, I'm going to start this off, but really make an appointment, carve out time, maybe, every other Saturday morning, whatever suits your schedule, but really adhere to it, because it takes, you've accumulated a lifetime. You might have inherited items from your parents. You can't get rid of it overnight. It does take time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand this over, same question, over to Frank.
I just want to reiterate something that Ellen just said. It does take time. As she said, you've accumulated these pieces for a long time in your collecting travels through the world, but too often you don't allow enough time to dispose of them. The sorting through takes a long time. The deciding personal conversations about why you want to keep this or want to let it go is an ongoing discussion for a lot of people. It's a love-hate relationship you have with certain things, but you still are not ready to get rid of it. We in the auction business, unfortunately, are called upon in the 11th and a half hour. The moving trucks are coming Saturday morning. It's Thursday. Do you think you can come tomorrow and go through my things and see what might be valuable? And we've all had that, and that's just part of the game. For us to do our job, we do need a certain amount of time, not only to come and inspect the items, but to determine their value and come back to you with a proposal. And then, it's your choice in that self-negotiation whether to give it up or not. Another thing is the new space will get, if you're downsizing to a smaller space, which many people are over the age of 50, you're going to end up wanting to keep more than will fit into your space. Because I've had plenty of people call me, we've done the auction, we've sold the things they want to get rid of, they move into the new apartment or smaller house, and then 6 weeks later they call and they say, we have another 40 things because we thought we were able to accommodate them, but they just don't fit. And you have to be aware that there will be often a round two to the decluttering. All right?
Thank you. So the round one is trying to handle these items on your own first. So from your experience, can you give some advice to the audience on how to start off?
So, I mean, it's kind of hard to add to that really well said and thought out response. I just find a lot of people have trouble getting started, and I find that taking one little step at a time instead of trying to take an overview and assess an entire huge amount of clutter, sometimes it's a little more helpful if you just take one little bite at a time. Pick something you're comfortable letting go of and just start working with that, as opposed to looking at an entire household, a lifetime and maybe multiple lifetimes of collections, and saying, how am I ever going to deal with all of this? And just cut it down to basics. What am I ready to let go of? And I think it's getting started that always is the hard part. And as Frank said, it's better to start sooner rather than later, because it no matter which way you go about it, it still takes time. And it's nice to take just one little bite at a time, and that way it gets you started, gets the ball rolling, and then once you may find yourself picking up momentum as you realize, hey, this is fun, it's a treasure hunt, let's move on to the next pile and see what we can find there. And so that's, really, I think, should about sum up our thoughts on it.
One more thing. The best of intentions collecting often turn around to bite you in the end, because you don't get to the project. Dealers are famous for that as well, not just the private collectors, but dealers will buy a piece that needs to be refinished and reupholstered and this and that, and it goes into a room in their storage facility, and 7 years later the piece is still there, having been untouched, but it's their money that has not been able to turn. So their dealers have the same thing. Private people often wait for a catastrophe to happen, water in the basement, something, the snow gets in the attic, and all of a sudden you go up there and you have to sort things out because you have workmen coming like I do tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. So yesterday and last night was spent doing exactly what you're going to do, dividing things up into piles. And, humans are pack rats. It's part of being, having a more developed eye. You say, oh, that chair is valuable. I'm not going to throw that away. So anyway, good.
Thank you guys. These were really great answers to the question. Getting started on your own. Just to kind of, move on to a process for somebody who, now gets to the point where there's so much clutter and it's become so overwhelming that the only option is to call on a professional such as yourselves. When working with a client, what is your usual process? I'm going to start this off with Ellen again.
Okay. Again, like I said last time, the first thing we do is we identify the goal and the challenges that stand in the way of, decluttering and letting go and being organized. And then I work side by side with my client. I usually work in 3 to 4 hour blocks of time. After 4 hours, it's really hard for people to make decisions. So I might work with a client every week for 4 hours for years sometimes. And what we do is we start small. We try to start with something easy or something that's really bothering them, and we just start going through and deciding, should we keep this? Should they keep this? Should they let it go? And when they get stuck, I help them kind of reframe, look at it from a different point of view. An example would be the treasure hunt. I'll ask them questions to just help them look at it from a different point of view, maybe one that's not quite so emotional, thinking more from their head, such as numbers or space. And then we just work our way through. And then I support them emotionally, because this can be really hard for people. And I also provide resources. Sometimes people are reluctant to let go until they've realized that they could donate these old towels with holes in them to an animal shelter, and then suddenly it's like, all right, let's get all the linens together so we can donate to an animal shelter. So, I help with resources as well.
Great. Chris, do you have some advice or actually more like a story or how you work with people when you're going in as a professional to help people downsize?
So as an auction gallery representative, I think we come at this at a little bit of a different perspective, because we're looking to help people monetize their material possessions. Sorry, how about now? Better? Okay. So as I was saying, we come at this from a little bit different angle because, again, we're trying to help people monetize their belongings and work for the best interest of the client and trying to get them the most money we can for their material. So, when we start, we go in and we look at it from a different perspective. We're in there looking for, we're looking for the money. We're hunting and trying to help find the client's best material that we feel we can turn into the most amount of money for them. So, from our perspective, in the same way, we go in and try and find out their goals. What do you want to do? Are you trying to liquidate everything? Are you trying to liquidate the majority? Do you just want the most money? What are your goals in this? Is it just to get organized and remove a few items so it feels a little less cluttered? So in that respect, we try and work with the client and work with their needs. But when we go in, we're going to discuss with them, and then we have any number of options from there. Normally what we're looking for is we'll go through and try and seek out the most valuable items in the house, and then decide with the client what they want to do with the rest of the material. And from there we can offer other suggestions as far as possibly, to a smaller auction gallery or a clean out person or a private sale to a dealer. And we can tailor these needs to whatever the client really wants to do. So that's really our process and what we try and do.
Just a question.
Sure.
So you're going in and valuing items that are going to be interesting
Correct.
And then others, you're referring to small auction houses, like you said, but is there ever a time where you're referring to charitable organizations or things to donate? I mean, are you going through and kind of helping them select which things that they want to go through, or are you kind of just looking for the value?
Well, that all depends on how extensive the collection is and what they need. So if they request and say, okay, you want these 5 items, now what do I do with everything else? And then, yeah, sure, there have been times when many people have walked through the door and walk an appraisal day that the intrinsic value of the items wasn't that great, and I recommend they donated to a local historical society because they were documents with specific value to a location. So there have been times that I've recommended donation. I'm working with a client right now, and they're Quakers, and they have some very good early Americana, but they also have a plethora of documents, minutes from 18th century Quaker life in Pennsylvania. So I recommended that these aren't going to bring a lot of money, or at least what they're really worth at auction. So I recommend they donate it to the Quakers. So yeah, there are times when I've...
Great, thank you.
Donations are wonderful. Our job is to open a dialogue, with the person in charge of the collection, and to listen to their needs. The African-American folk singer Odetta died a few years ago, and she lived in a wonderful apartment on Fifth Avenue facing Central Park. But her collection was really not very valuable from a monetary point of view. But the team that I was working on, several of us, we came up with the idea that the Library of Congress would be the perfect place for all of her music, all of her sheet music, all of her lyrics, things that she had worked on for her whole career. And that was our recommendation. Could we have made some money on it? Probably a little bit, but for we listened to what the people wanted to do. They believed the integrity of the collection was such that it should kind of remain together. And there is something to be said for that. There are single owner collections that come up at auction that occasionally are bought by one person because they believe the collection should remain intact. There was a very famous arts and crafts collection of green and green furniture that came up a few years ago, collected by the man that wrote the book on green and green. It was all bought by one person for the Huntington Hartford Museum because the state of California deemed that it would be best kept as a group. And, we applauded that, and we thought it was a wonderful idea. That usually isn't what happens, but if you can keep certain things, together as a collection, that is, keeping in line with the ideas of the executors of the will or the people who are in charge of the estate, it can be a very good thing. But we're an auction house. We are here to sell things and monetize them for the owners in general.
Thank you very much. So often people accumulate so many things that they don't even realize what they have. Can you describe an instance when you discovered an item that was significantly more valuable than the owner realized? I'm going to target this question to Frank and Chris. And Frank, would you like to start off this question?
It happens a lot, but it doesn't happen as often as people think. In this day and age of information, the information network has a lot of great information and a lot of misinformation, as we've all found. Most of the time, people who've done research come in with a slightly inflated idea of the value of something. We do kind of antique roadshows, heirloom discovery days. We go to places and see many, many people out of the auction houses. And most of the time, I would say 90% of what you see does not have very much value, except for jewelry. Jewelry is always a good seller because it's very few people who are owners of jewelry are gemologists, and they would not be able to chart the value of the stones. So, because it's a little formulaic, there are ways that the jewelry specialist can come up with a pretty accurate assessment of a piece of jewelry. Most people can't do that, so they're pleasantly surprised often when they bring jewelry. But I remember going to a Hadassah Heirloom Discovery Day in Baldwin, Long Island, and I got an arts and crafts vase that had been sitting holding the kitchen door open for 40 years and had a nice chip on it, glazed chip at the bottom, but I took it in, I knew it was valuable, and ended up selling it privately for $100,000. So it does happen. That's a rarity. It does happen, but in general, 90% of the time, it's a single, not a home run.
What was the reaction of the client after they sold?
She didn't believe it. I said we would start out thinking in terms of $50,000, and she didn't believe it, and she called back and said 50, and then I told her I had a private buyer willing to pay $100,000. She said, okay. Her daughter called the next day and said, did you say $100,000? Then she called when she got the check, and she said, is this real? Because, tonight is Powerball. There are games being played with that even as we speak. It's always too good to be true. So, the winners from the other day, who were mistakenly identified as winners, had 20 minutes of fame in the bar, and it was all over the news that they celebrated like there was no tomorrow until they found out there was a tomorrow.
So Frank, I actually would ask you to follow up a little bit. One thing we don't cover very often is brokering private deals, and you sound like you're more familiar with it than I am, because we've been discussing auctions, and we very rarely get an opportunity to discuss brokering private, like even single owner collections to one person. You had a client for a vase. We don't often get to discuss that.
Auction houses thrive on the competition amongst many bidders. Now with the advent of the internet bidding, you have absentee bids, you have live audience members, you have telephone bidders, and you have absentee bidders via the internet. So you have all of these four groups competing, and the idea is to make competition to drive the prices higher. Every once in a while you will come across a collector who wants to be called if you get something extraordinary. I have it for Tiffany lamps all the time, but most of the time, you really want the competition because there's enough collectors of Tiffany. But for this particular thing, this person had a certain amount of money they had to spend every year from a trust, and I knew that this was a possibility for this vase, and had a discussion about it. I told them what I was looking for, and they beat the price significantly enough so it wouldn't go elsewhere. And I've had that backfire too. I've had people say, no, I'll put it at auction, and the person who made the private offer out of spite didn't bid at auction, so the person ended up making less. That does happen too. But in this particular instance, we had a private buyer with a deep pocket who had a specific, set of criteria. So this particular thing was better at that moment being sold privately. But most of the time, people like to put it up at auction because they figure the competition is going to drive it way over the high estimate. Auction people, we have a low estimate and a high estimate on every item. We see the low estimate, the consignor sees the high estimate. And that's just wishful thinking.
Thanks. Yes. So we have walk-in appraisal days here many Mondays from 1 to 4. So we get to see a lot of local people come in with all manner of different, everything from tchotchkes to really important pieces. I can't boast a $100,000 price tag out of one of them, but one thing that came in rather interestingly was it was a medal. It's called the Manly Medal. It was the first medal with Washington's portrait minted in the United States, 1799. So it came in, walk-in appraisal day, and I looked at it, and I'm 99% positive I recognize what this is. And it could have been one of three different types. It could have been a white metal, a silver, or a bronze. It obviously wasn't the bronze because it was silver color, but it could have been either a white metal or a silver. Silver, there's only 4 known. So it was still really hard to tell whether this was A, real, and B, whether it was silver or white metal. Because you can't exactly, with something like that, you can't exactly put it on a touchstone and test it with acid. That would be bad. So it turns out that it was actually a silver one, and I think it hammered for around 12,000. And later on, I found out the provenance on this, well, actually during preview, I found out the provenance on this was very strong. It was really interesting. The family were the descendants of the people who housed George and Martha Washington at Valley Forge over the winter. So I just thought that was really interesting. And that brings up another point is it was silver. This is one of those instances where if they came in, they brought in a random silver medal and said, and I look at it and say, oh, scrap. And you know, scrap is one of those very tricky things. You take it to a jeweler, they say they give you $12 for the metal, and then it goes into a smelting pot. So you kind of have to be careful if you find something that's silver or gold. Don't just necessarily assume that it's only worth the commodity value. And many times you'll find there are disreputable people in the scrapping world that will know what this is when you bring it in and only offer you the commodity value. So you really should talk to somebody you trust that knows their way around it. And, you know, we're always here. We're a ready resource. You can send us digital photographs and we'll be happy to take a look. That's my story.
Great, thank you. Can you give an example where you had an item where you did know that by scrapping it would have more value being scrapped than it would be as a whole?
I did, yeah, those happen, frankly, more often at this juncture because the commodities market is still rather high. So many times you get people with large flatware sets, and only very specific patterns of flatware generally have an intrinsic value higher than the commodity value. And things people don't take into consideration are it's not a full set, it's a partial set, it's monogrammed. A lot of that hurts it in the marketplace because, you know, I don't really want something that's initials JR. I don't know anyone JR, doesn't fit with me. So a lot of times the value in that is really only the weight of the silver. But I would still urge you to double check with somebody before assuming that.
Thank you. Next question is, I'm going to start Ellen off with this question because I'm very interested to hear your answer. Have you ever been genuinely shocked when you walked into a client's home? Can you tell us one of the most interesting or extreme cases? This could be about a certain type of mess or a lack of collection, something like that.
Well, since I approach my work from a very non-judgmental point of view, it is hard for me to be shocked after, you know, knowing about the Collier brothers. A clutter bug is nothing, you know. And I see the order when I go into a home, and, you know, the client sees they're embarrassed and you know, but I look for order. But I was shocked at one point. I worked in a professional office where this, the owner of the company had like 10 employees, and in his office there must have been over 100 sex toy kits, like starter kits. And I couldn't believe the number of them, and I don't know why they were in his business office. He was not selling them from there. So that's kind of the only time I've been really shocked. I have found things like foot-long petrified rats and the excrement that goes with it, you know, so I've seen some pretty gross things. But generally, I'm not shocked and I don't judge. I just, you know, we're all on different journeys. And so be it.
Even the rat.
That's a very great story. I appreciate that.
I have a number, but I'm going to cut to the strangest one. This gentleman was the ex-director of the Lars Anderson Museum, a car museum in Massachusetts. He passed away unbeknownst to anyone, and I found him a couple weeks later, but his house, every surface was covered with 6 to 8 inches of objects. Books, paintings, frames, silver, sculpture, everything you can conceive of. We spent, I would say, 3 days just going through everything with staff of packers and sorters and the family of the curator. I was called in specifically because he had 2 Tiffany lamps. And unfortunately, as soon as I saw them, I said, these are lovely, but they're Tiffany style lamps. These are reproductions. They said, well, he paid a lot of money for this lamp. And I said, what's a lot of money? He said, $2,000. I said, if this lamp were correct, it's $200,000. But I said, but under the couch there, you have 2 real Tiffany shades. So it ended up that we went through, and they probably got $500,000 out of the clutter. But in addition to what my auction house took, the Kaminsky auction house in Massachusetts took another, $100 to $150, maybe even $200,000 worth of smalls, and just little things that were under $1,000. And he was a hoarding curator, and he saw value in everything and didn't throw anything away. And the idea of all of these things, once again, is that the more knowledge we have, the more we can see that this is valuable, and this is under the money, and I should do something with this, and then you take it home and move everything 2 inches to the left and put it down. That's what collecting is.
Did you end up actually clearing through the whole house after that?
By the time the Kaminsky and my crew left, it was broom clean. And so they spent, I think, another day. We spent 3 days going through things, making lists, and another, I would say, 5 days packing, and because I'm very hands-on in overseeing packing, because I deal with a lot of fragile glass, and I have to make sure that it's going to arrive intact. Susanna and I had a conversation earlier today of a collector who's very nervous about having her things packed and shipped because they're glass. We have professionals. We know who to hire. We can assure you that the things get to us 99% of the time completely intact. And that's important. You're entrusting an auction house, even though the pieces are insured. The worst conversations we ever have to have are when damage does occur and you have to call somebody. And, even though they're being paid, it's a stab, to them. So.
Example of a collection or
Sure. I'm sure we all agree there's probably at least a dozen or so that we've walked in on and said, sorry. But one of the ones that sticks in my head the most is we went into this lovely family's home, lovely lady still living there, and you walk in and it's wall-to-wall color, all porcelains of every shape and size, and she was bound by a wheelchair, so she could barely make it in through the pathways, and she had to pick up things to move them out of the way so she can come through, and then when she was done, she'd spin around and put it back down. And this was all real delicate porcelains and dried flowers and the whole works. And this is one of those times when you really just need to evaluate your situation at some point and realize, and the hardest part is to realize there's a problem at some point, that it was affecting her life. She literally couldn't move in her house without worrying about breaking something, rolling over something. Every time she moved 2 feet, she had to pick up another little porcelain figurine and put it down and then roll past, spin around, put it back down. And I mean, we ended up getting a lot of very good porcelains out of there, and $60,000 to $70,000 worth of fantastic jewelry. But she probably should have started decluttering that mess, 10 years ago. And for the longest time, she lived with her 2 sons in the house, and they grew up like that. And they had to be careful. Anytime they sat down, they had to look first. They had to make sure they didn't bump anything. I couldn't imagine growing up like that. That must have been very, very difficult. So that's one of the odder ones that I've seen, or at least the one that sticks in my head the most.
So I have to ask them, would she get rid of a good amount of porcelain or the collection?
Well, it pretty much stayed. I believe we took maybe 150 lots, and that really didn't even make a dent. And she was unwilling. She still was holding on to everything as if it was precious. And to her it was. Everything held a memory. She remembered when she picked something up. She remembered when she bought it. She remembered how much she paid for it. She remembered why she bought it. And it was just, difficult for her. So she did commit to removing some of it, but there was still tens of thousands of pieces left there when it was all said and done.
Auction consignments come with 2 stories, every item. How they got it and why they're going to let it go. And those are the painful stories.
Chris, you actually just are filtering my next question. I would love to know whether you're going to use that example or a different one, but one of the hurdles that people face in downsizing is the emotional attachment they form with their possessions. Have you ever worked with a client, obviously you have, where they have a certain item that they want to get rid of, but they're really struggling with it emotionally, and how do you handle such a delicate situation?
Well, I think, as both of my colleagues know, every piece has an emotional attachment. Every piece that you've collected has that story behind it. I bought it with my husband, and he passed away, and I remember going out to the flea market with him at 6 a.m. all shivering, and he spotted this from 100 yards away, and he ran over to it, and we bought it, and we've had it ever since, and it sits right on the mantle, and I really don't ever want it to move. And every piece has that story. I'm actually going out to look at a coin collection on Monday, and she's had these pieces for 65 years. She inherited it from her father, and he inherited it from his father. And she does not want to sell these pieces. But I believe that monetarily, I think she needs the money. And so it's my job to kind of help her understand that we can help get the most for it, and we'll treat it with the same care that it was treated in your possession, and we'll make sure that everybody has an opportunity to own and love it, and somebody will eventually, from our hands to somebody who will appreciate it. And I think that's one of the biggest things for an auction gallery to make someone understand, is that we're going to put it in the hands of someone else who's going to love and cherish the same piece in the same way that you did.
Do you have specific tactics and ways to kind of make people feel comfortable with that, knowing that they want to, get rid of it?
Well, there's really no easy way to do it, and everybody's very individual. So I don't have any tactics, because it's tactic. I don't know that I like to use that term, because it's not really a tactic. I'm still trying to act in the best interest of the client. So, and that's one of the tactics, is to make them understand that we're here to help them. We're here to work in their best interest. We're here to get them all the exposure that their piece can possibly have. So that's really the only tactic I have, is just try and make them understand that we're going to put it in the hands of someone who's going to appreciate it and love it, and will find it just like they did.
Well, like Chris, I, remind them of their goal, but my clients, it's not necessarily monetary value. An example I have is I had a client who their daughter died when their daughter was 4. And here it is 32 years later, and we're just going through the bedroom with the possessions. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of hugging. I would leave there so drained, but I was so happy to be there for her because her husband, it was just as hard for him, and he couldn't support her in that way. And so I felt honored to be part of this process. And she and I became so close, and this is like 5 years, and I'm still working with her. So what I do, I'm very compassionate. I am understanding of their feelings, and I acknowledge it. But I do have to remind them the goal is to let go, and we figure out ways. Do we want to photograph something? Do we want to make a scrapbook? Are there other ways that we can honor the memories? Because a lot of this is just memory triggers. So do you need the actual item to remember, or is a photograph enough of a memory trigger? And often a photo is enough. And then, like Chris said, reminding the client that if you do donate it or sell it, someone else can cherish it. It's not going in the landfill. It will be valued. It just doesn't need to be valued, by them. So just compassion and understanding is kind of the way I get through it.
We're all good listeners. It comes with the territory. We have to take into account not just what the client is saying, but sometimes we have to understand the relationship within the families. Those of us who have children, you run into this thing at some point about, passing things along to children while you're alive, or when they're moving into a new apartment, or this or that. And it's usually when you're around and can make rational decisions, it's fine. But after you pass away and your children are left to come to terms with monetary values of things being passed down, it can get unpleasant. The divvying up of things to make the equality of it can sometimes be very, very argumentative and spiteful. So the auction world has kind of a sane way that if you take this item and you sell it, you divide the proceeds in two and everybody's happy. And that's kind of the King Solomon approach to it, that you be wise and you don't say, well, you take this $25,000 lamp and I'll take $5,000 each 5 vases, and that's never the same. Everybody always feels they're being taken advantage of. I wrote down my stock answer to this: the sentimental value of an item sometimes does not outweigh the monetary value, especially when siblings quarrel. So, and we've seen all permutations on this. I've had people walk away from a major collection. They didn't want the money, they didn't want anything, because they were just so hurting, because the family had changed. And it's well, for some people it's not about the money at all. It's about the memory of the person. And, it's just part of grieving. Sorry for an unhappy note.
Well, why don't we put a positive spin on it? How about you tell me a story when you made a positive difference in your client's quality of life after you worked with them?
Well, I mentioned one already, the Saturday evening girls' vase that sold for $100,000. This was a retiree, and that changed her life. Another good one was I had a lalique vase consigned to me by the nephew of a nurse whose patient had passed away and left her this lalique vase. The nurse got sick and was close to death. The nephew brought me this vase. We sold it for her, and he used the money to bury her. And it's kind of a horrible thing to relate, but we made a difference in somebody who didn't have money in order to take care of the family needs. And I felt positive about that. But then the other side of the coin is on March 1995, I had a sale of the first 20th century decorative arts object at auction that made $1 million. We made $8 million for this particular Texas oil man in 2 hours, and he needed the money. It took his debt away. He never said thank you, never felt that he got anything other than a raw deal out of the world. So even though we made all this money for him, it didn't make a difference in his quality of life. He was still embittered because, oh, how the mighty have fallen is a real true statement.
Those are two good examples for different reasons all their life. Ellen, can you give me an example of a client of yours that really changed your life?
Well, probably my best example is the one I just mentioned with the couple whose daughter had died. I have to say I have hundreds of clients who are just, my joy is their joy. When my clients tell me how grateful they are, they couldn't do it alone. They were completely stuck. They did not know where to begin. They didn't know how to make the decisions. And in just 3 or 4 hours, just to let go of things they don't use and they don't love, and the freedom they feel, the peace, the harmony, and how then they're learning, and it just gets easier and easier, and then they have skills they can use for the rest of their lives. They tell me they hear my voice, what would Ellen do? And it's just so rewarding for me to help people in their transition to create the home, the office, and the lifestyle that they want, instead of just feeling bad about themselves because they just don't have the motivation to get rid of the clutter, to learn how to make decisions and learn how to really be empowered and become very clear in what's important. You really, when you go through every single thing you own, you really become clear in what's important, love and family and photos, then maybe, other things that then they can sell.
Did you ever have a client that after they worked with you, they were able to organize things on their own, and they learned a lot of strategies from you?
I have 2 sets of clients. Situationally disorganized people where, their parents died, or they got divorced, or they moved, or they had a child, and so there was just chaos. They couldn't keep up. Then there are the chronically disorganized people, and they can range from, people with ADD up to hoarding, and it's a challenge for those people. As much as they want to be different, it's hard, and they do learn, but keeping up every day, opening the mail every day is really hard for them. So yeah, they learn, but they're still very grateful.
Chris, I'd love to hear a story from where you helped change the quality of your client's life.
So I'd just like to start out and say, hi, I'm Chris, and I have a clutter problem.
Most auction people do.
But the one that comes to mind is one of the more recent ones. A friend of mine, he's not really a friend, he's an acquaintance and a client that I grew in to become friends with him. And along the way, he became ill and immobilized and incapacitated. So he trusted me enough to go into his house while he was through rehab, and I went through his house and continued to kind of pull out items for him and help him declutter as he was getting progressively more ill. So I'd like to think that I kind of helped him pay for his care and try and keep his world at least a little more organized, and helped ease his mind a little bit that somebody was handling his affairs at the home, so to speak. So that's really my only story, and it just rings to me because he was a good man.
I have a quick fun one. An old dentist client of mine, after he retired, would sell off a Tiffany lamp every year to go on a cruise. And I thought that was a wonderful reward for himself. I don't know if he needed the money, I would assume not, but he would sell the thing off, and he and his friend would go on a cruise, for a month. And I said, what a wonderful idea for the good place for the money to go to give you pleasure. Everybody, we're talking about highfalutin sales. Everybody knows about tag sales and estate sales and yard sales. And sometimes the things are so cheap, they're too good to pass up. And so they sell, a good percentage of what's out. But I get called into a lot to look at something, and I always tell them, this is the credo. Once it leaves the house, it doesn't go back in. And that will help. If you put a lot of stuff out, you're not going to want to drag it back into the garage. So, call it charity, let it go. You weren't born with it, you're not taking it with you when you go. The pharaohs tried, and it didn't work for them. Can't take it with you.
So I want to thank you for answering all my questions, and I would love to turn it to the audience if they want to ask specific questions to the panel. I guess I will go ahead and come over to the audience.
Jerry Springer Show.
Hi. So I am interested in speaking with a professional organizer in terms of Ellen. So when you're sorting through stuff, do you have a certain set of questions that you're asking your clients to sort of answer, like, have you worn this, or have you touched this in a year? Is this something that's like, do you have some way of sort of sifting through the details when you're making those decisions? Is there some?
Yeah, I have a plethora of questions I ask. One you mentioned, when was the last time you wore it? Some people like to go by if you haven't worn it in a year. I let the client decide what the parameter is because I don't make the decisions. Sometimes I'll ask them, like, how many of an item do you need? Like, not even looking at what you have. Like, how many black purses do you need? And they might go, well, 6. I need, the big tote, and then the regular everyday one, and the dress one, And then we gather them all up, and it's like, they're like, oh my God, I have 18 black purses. And
Who doesn't?
so then then we go for the treasures. Or I might say, what do you think about just storing your purses here, in this section? Do you think you could limit it to that? And they go, well, yeah, because I don't have any more space than that. And then we get all the purses in there, and then we have like tons more. So then we'll start weeding through, again, going for the treasures. Sometimes, like, I was with a woman the other day, and she said, oh, I wear this coat once or maybe twice a year. And then I'm like, well, does it pay the rent? Is it worth keeping if you're only going to wear it once or twice a year? I don't know what the answer is, and if she says, yeah, definitely, I want to keep it, well, that's fine. But I ask a lot of questions to try to get them to reframe it, to think in a different way. When it comes to paper, a lot of my clients grew up without computers, so paper used to be really important. So then I'll say, will you remember that you even have this information? And if you remember you have it, will you know where to find it? And are you just going to Google it? And then they're like, well, yeah, you're right, I'll just go to the computer, I'll Google it. So then it's like, so do we want to let this go? And they're like, yeah, let it go. So especially with paper, people want to hold on to things they think they're going to read, and then their reading stack is, huge. And it's like, you've got to narrow it down. We cannot read everything we want to. We don't have that much time. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Nor use every cookbook. Also, just to backtrack to purses, don't ever throw a purse out without looking through it, because there's a $50 bill tucked in there somewhere.
Some of us have things that we
Yeah.
some of us have things that we know are valuable, but there's also a cyclicality to value. And so if we bring you in at the down cycle, will you tell us what you know? If you hold on to it, if this is one of the things you can hold on to for about 2 years, you'll probably maximize the value more. Do you do time-related advice?
So the unfortunate answer to that question is we have no crystal ball. So though it might be cyclical, it's not as if I can say there's a famine every 10 years, so stock up year 9 and you're going to need that. So we can tell you what's trending and we can tell you what's out of vogue, but giving you a hard and fast rule and timeline is kind of out of our ability, so to speak. What I find the most is a lot of people collected all of this material because all their friends were collecting it, and everybody was collecting it. And then everybody started realizing again at the same time, well, I don't really need all this stuff, it's worth a lot of money, let's sell it off. And then it's kind of like the last person holding the bag is getting the least value for it, and they're saying, well, but I paid $10,000 for this, what do you mean it's worth $1,000? And so it's the cycle is there, but it could be an extended cycle, it could be 100 years. So gauging that's hard.
Hard is not, doesn't approach the process at all. Auction prices are often wholesale prices. Retail prices are retail prices. You're paying for the upkeep, the dealer's space, his expertise, what he spent on the object. So it's not uncommon for something that was bought for $5,000 to appear in a dealer shop at $15,000. You know, if we're pricing it, we're going to price it at the $5,000 it should be priced at on a wholesale level. And so people have to understand that. You know, we're as Chris said, we're not clairvoyant. We keep our fingers to the pulse, but there are things that happen beyond our control, like the changes in the ivory laws, which have left many collectors holding a group of ivory things that they can't sell now. And so, you know, there's not a, every 2 days I got a phone call with somebody. New York and New Jersey have pretty stringent laws, and people want to say, what am I going to do with the ivory pieces? I said, you just have to sit on them, because who knows what's going to happen. Will the laws be amended to accept antique things? Nobody knows. But, you know, the anti-elephant, anti-ivory lobby is very strong, and Ringling and Barnum and Bailey have just decided not to use elephants anymore. So, you know, it's a good thing, but at the same time, you know, things have to be qualified a little bit and realize, you know, that a lot of things that we're selling did not involve poaching of elephant tusks. So. Too political? It's important. It's important.
You don't show up. Every time you get a call or you try to weed out client before you go there, and does anybody, what do you suggest the person does when they're going to their house? Do they things out, or do you wander into the house and just look at this cat back in the basement? What would be the setup? That would be, you come out each time you get a call?
No. No, we don't. We don't come out every time we receive a phone call. So the way we work it here, and I think you'll find with many people, is we request digital images first. And anytime you do that, we suggest you want to tantalize the prospective auctioneer, so you or dealer or whoever you're going to talk to. So you would want to take images of what you perceive to be the best material, the most valuable, intrinsically valuable material. And you would send email that to whichever personage you're going to send it to. And that's the best way to get it started. And if the estate seems like it's viable, and especially if it's local, we will most likely take a trip out. But it all starts with tempting us. Give us a reason, and everybody's going to kind of be on the same page as that. Is, you know, we need to see your images, we need to review it, and we do also have walk-in appraisal days. So you know, if it's only a few select items, then you could always bring them in for our inspection. That all depends on what type of material you have. because each department, it depends on if it's, for example, if it's Tiffany Glass, you may need to see Frank, and Frank may be on the West Coast for a month, so you may have to wait a month. If it was Coins and Currency, I might be able to come out on Tuesday to take a look. And this week, you know, I'm out of the office. So it all depends on what you have and how busy we are.
It can happen quickly. I got a call last night about 6 o'clock. Somebody who had a Gallet vase, and I was going to be passing not too far from the house on the way here today, so I stopped in to see it, and he was very pleasantly surprised it happened so quickly. So, you know, it really depends. However, people don't always know what they have either. Every leaded glass lamp, or not every, but every 70% of what people say this is a Tiffany lamp is not a Tiffany lamp. It's a leaded glass lamp. There were 17 to 20 different makers back in the day when Tiffany was doing it. So everybody who sees a stained glass lamp, they say I have a Tiffany lamp. So we, you know, the difference between a $1,000 lamp and a $100,000 lamp can be contained in a photograph. There's people, professionals who know their business usually can tell you from the photograph if they need to see the piece up close and personal. So.
I can add that from the office perspective, we really appreciate seeing these pictures. And it is kind of a treasure hunt for us, right? In the morning you open up your email, and there are things to look at, some of which are really exciting. And even if they're not, you're giving people that information that they need in order to make a final decision as to the disposition of property. If it is something that you think we can sell well for you, something that's valuable, will come out really quickly. It's something that you tell us really needs to be handled quickly because there's a contractor, and I think you've heard from everybody else on the panel that frequently people wait too long. If we can accommodate it, we surely do. And if you want to handle it in a different way, there's also appraisals for insurance or for equitable distribution if you wanted to go to children or family members. That's a whole other conversation, but you should know that that's another way we value it.
Can I just add one thing? We were talking about paper goods, going through your paper goods and throwing out what's not pertinent. Don't throw out receipts. They can change the complexion of an antique, because if you have the right provenance to it or know where you got it, it can be it can make people very interested in the piece. So. What time is it? 7 o'clock. 7:04. That went fast. We couldn't hear that.
I couldn't hear that.
Would she contact you directly or put a general call into the open house if she needed property value?
Either one.
And what type of procedure conditions I can answer that. So if you don't know who the appropriate specialist is, call the auction house. We'll, I would say, send you an exam and we'll direct it where it should go, like multiple departments. Or we'll know right away who we need to speak to and we'll just direct you to Chris or try immediately.
And another thing is, so as far as getting an auction estimate is concerned, there are no fees. So we don't, if you are requesting to sell an item and send an email to us and say, what would you estimate this at, there are no fees for that. Just so we're on the same page. What do you think?
Do you always assume that the possessor of an object is the legitimate owner of that object?
Having spoken to a lawyer, the term always is not in my vocabulary. So in our contract, it actually, you are signing stating that you are the legal owner or have legal right to sell this item. That kind of, I don't assume that. I make you sign a paper that says you are.
I'm actually working through a situation now, and it happened, where someone called an email, on a piece of property in Dale, and I think this was stolen from my father's studio. And, I would say I'm involved in these kind of conversations a dozen times a year, requesting title. He was very pleasant, said he wanted more information. And I told him that I needed more information from him. I have a letter from the lawyer that told me that this was the situation because I needed to show it to my consignor, who obviously is not going to be happy. He really, if he bought it legitimately, which is the likelihood, to hear that he didn't have good title. So we went back and forth. He said, no, I'm not planning to use a lawyer. I'm not going to contest it. In fact, I just like to buy it. So that was nice. He was very pleasant. But at that point, I said, well, Martin, is the heir to this property? He said, yes. I said, he's the sole heir to this property. He said, no, he has 3 siblings. So he didn't tell me that it's okay with him. I don't know if it's okay with the other 3 siblings. And the last thing we want is to sell a piece of property to an unsuspecting buyer when it's going to come back and be questioned. So right now we have to call the consignor and say, this is what's happened, and it's going to have to be looked into, but we can't sell it until it's resolved. Most of the time, this does not happen, but if that's a good question, I don't see an issue for sure. Rarely.
All right, thank you, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It's just my comedic training.